I cataloged the specimen on a Tuesday, which is the kind of detail you remember afterward because it seems like it should have mattered and didn't. My name is Senahask Oveth, and I kept the records at Calver Hold, a biotic survey station built on stilts over the tide flats of Threnna, where the water goes out twice a day and leaves 100 kilometers of gray mud breathing under the light. The dome over the lower labs let the daylight in flat and even, no matter the hour, so that nobody down there ever quite knew what time it was unless they checked. I liked that about the place. It made the days feel longer than they were. The specimen came up out of sediment core 9, sealed in a clay nodule older than the station's charter, older than the authority that built the station, older, we'd learn later, than most things anyone at Calver Hold could put a number to. Bresson, our junior biologist, logged it as inert tissue, filed it under routine, and went to dinner. I remember because I countersigned the log. That's the kind of thing an archivist does. We sign things. There were 9 of us at Calver Hold that survey season, which is small enough that you learn everyone's habits whether you mean to or not. Bresson whistled when he worked and went silent the moment he was actually concentrating. Tavan kept the dome's bolts greased past any reasonable maintenance schedule because he didn't trust the manufacturer's numbers. I kept the record room 2 degrees under spec because the paper logs we still kept by charter requirement curled at the edges if the air ran warm, and I had grown particular about my paper not curling. None of that is in the official report. I am putting it here because it is the last ordinary thing I have to say about any of them, and I want it written somewhere. Calver Hold had been built 61 years earlier under the old Murrith Compact's biohazard authority, back when the compact still existed to have authorities. Every survey station from that era carried the same fail-safe, a single hard-wired recall switch, separate from station power, that did exactly one thing when thrown. It broadcast a containment alert on the authority's old monitoring band and waited for the authority to come. The Murrith Compact dissolved 38 years ago. Nobody had told the switch. Nobody had told it because nobody at Calver Hold had ever needed to. The recall switch was a fixture, like the rust on the dome bolts, a thing you walked past, not a thing you thought about. I had logged it in the station inventory 4 times in 9 years and never once asked who, if anyone, was still listening on the other end. The tissue in core 9 was not inert. It came awake on the 3rd night, quietly, the way I imagine most true emergencies do, not with an alarm but with somebody not answering a comm that they should have answered. Tavan missed his evening check-in. Bresson went looking for him and came back wrong, not hurt, not bleeding, just wrong, moving like a man being operated from somewhere just behind his own eyes, his whistle gone, replaced by a low, even hum I have not been able to stop hearing in quiet rooms since. By the time I understood what I was looking at, 2 more of the crew had stopped answering as well, and the corridor lights on the lower deck were doing something to the air that made the daylight from the dome look wrong, thinned out, like it was being filtered through more than glass. I will not describe what the thing did to a body once it was inside one. I have written it twice for the incident report and twice deleted it. It is enough to say that it moved through the station's air return in under an hour, that it preferred the warm dark of the equipment bays to the lit corridors, and that by the time I reached the record room, I had already lost the ability to count on one hand how many of us were still ourselves. I remember locking the record room hatch behind me with both bolts, which the manual says is for storms, and thinking, with the strange clarity that fear sometimes gives you, that I had never once in 9 years used both bolts at the same time. The record room held the recall switch. I had never thrown it. I threw it then, with no particular hope, mostly because it was the only thing in the room I hadn't already tried. It did exactly what 61-year-old hardware is supposed to do. It broadcast on the authority's old band, into a dead compact, into static, and I sat there in the flat daylight from the dome bracing for nothing back at all. Something answered in under 4 minutes. Calver Hold, this is Specialist IMO Ray's Earth Deep Field Containment Archive. I'm not who you were calling. I want to say that up front because I imagine it matters to you and it would matter to me. Your line's not on any active compact registry. It hasn't been in 38 years. It's on ours. It has been since before either of us were doing this job. We kept the monitoring obligation past the point anyone asked us to. I don't have a clean reason why. We just never wrote ourselves off the list. I asked her stupidly whether a ship was coming. No, she said, without performing any regret about it. Nearest hull with the right clearance is 11 days out. You don't have 11 days. You have, by my read of your station's biohazard archive cross-reference, about 90 minutes before the spread profile stops being survivable by anyone still walking around in there. So we're not sending a ship. I'm going to read you a protocol instead. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I have thought about it more than almost anything else in my life since. It was not relief. It was a kind of cold, procedural attention, the same attention I give to filing a difficult record, the recognition that something enormous had just been handed to me, and that the only correct response was to write it down accurately and follow it exactly. The protocol was specific in a way that nothing else that night had been. Rays walked me through sealing the air return in 3 stages, not 2, because, she said, a 2-stage seal had failed in an incident on Earth itself, 140 years before I was born, against an organism her own archive flagged as a near match to whatever had come up out of Core 9. She had me pull the dome's emergency UV array off its weather setting and onto a frequency band the manufacturer had never published, reading me the exact figures from a file she said her predecessors had pulled apart and rebuilt 3 separate times across 3 separate centuries, for 3 separate stations, none of which had ever been Calver Hold, none of which had ever been mine. She did not ask me how many of my crew were left. She asked me where they were, 1 section at a time, and adjusted the sequence around the answer. It took 51 minutes. I lost Taven. I lost 2 others whose names are in the report and will stay there, because this is not the place to spend them. I kept 4, including Bresson, who came back to himself in the medical bay an hour later with no memory of the last night and a question in his eyes I did not have an answer for yet. Ray stayed on the line the entire time. Somewhere around the 40-minute mark, when I told her the Western Seal had held and asked, flatly, whether that meant it was over, she said, "Close enough," and then nothing else for a while, which I understood by then to be its own kind of answer. I have read the Joint Containment Watch since Article 2 of the Old Shoal Accord, the agreement that put that recall switch on Earth's monitoring charter in the first place, signed between the Murrith Compact and a junior signatory state most histories don't bother nomming. Earth was that signatory. Earth signed because it was easier to monitor one more frequency than to argue about which stations mattered and which didn't. The compact that asked it to never thought to ask it to stop. We did not send for them. We sent for an authority that had not existed in my lifetime, and the call landed, by 61 years of inherited paperwork, on a world that had simply never taken itself off the list. I filed the incident report the way I file everything, completely in order, without embellishment. In the notes field, where the form asks for recommended action, I wrote that Calver Hold's recall switch should remain wired exactly as it is, unchanged, indefinitely. Then I added a second line, smaller, not really part of the report at all, that the channel had stayed open after Rays signed off, carrier humming quiet under the dome's daylight, and that I had decided, for reasons I did not fully explain even to myself, to leave it that way.